Shalom, welcome to Tactically Torah. I am Heath Hayes. Tonight I want to dive into the book of Galatians. But before we do, I want to give you a preface, if you will, kind of where the Torah came from and why it's necessary. To put it in context, you got to understand that the Torah was given to a group of people, the Hebrew people, Israel as a whole, obviously before they were Israel. It was given to a rebellious and perverse generation that had come out of bondage and slavery. And I say that to say that they had no clue the standards of the Most High, what it took to obtain righteousness. They didn't know how to act, didn't know how to worship the God that just brought them out of bondage and slavery to Egypt that they had been in for the last several hundred years. They had no clue of the ways that had been that their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and even the first few generations that lived in Goshen before they were put into slavery. They didn't know of that God, so they're brought into the desert out of slavery. And the Father gives them His Torah. What is the Torah? It is His laws, His commands. Torah is the Hebrew word for law. So it is literally the standards that the Father set forth for the people so that they would know what is acceptable, how to operate as a nation in order for the presence of the Most High to be in the camp. So it's a standard. It is a standard by which righteousness is achieved. Deuteronomy 6:25 says it is righteousness to us who obey the commands that were given to us on this day. So we're to obey. It is about obedience. Righteousness through obedience out of love. So when you read from all throughout the Old Testament, you see countless stories of how the Hebrew people who were married to the Most High, they take His laws and commands, and the Father calls them a whoring nation. Why? Because they time and time again would go after false gods, false deities, and worship this God and worship that God, and worship in manners that were not prescribed to the Most High. See, throughout the Torah, He gave the manner that is acceptable to Him for us to worship Him. And His laws, His commands, His ways by which we are to live our lives that would be suitable for the King to dwell with us. Keep, as I read through Galatians, kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because that's going to essentially be the theme. So let's go ahead and start. I'm reading from the scriptures. If you're in the Bible app, it's probably TS 2009. The scriptures, Galatians, and I'm probably going to do this in set sections, maybe one or two chapters at a time. So let's start with verse 1. Shaul, an emissary, not from men nor by man, but by Yeshua, Messiah, and Elohim the Father who raised him from the dead. All the brothers who are with me, to the assemblies of Galatia. Favor to you and peace from Elohim the Father and our Master Yeshua Messiah, who gave himself for our sins to deliver us out of this present wicked age, according to the desire of our Elohim and Father, to whom be the praise forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so he starts off with just this greeting to the people of Galatia, and says who he is, and essentially that he is establishing the belief that he has on Yeshua as the Messiah. He has found his Messiah. So we know that he is going to be diving into, within this letter, the importance of Yeshua as the Messiah. So he says, I marvel that you were so readily turning away from him, Yeshua, who called you in the favor of Messiah to a different good news, which is not another, only there are some who are troubling you and wishing to pervert the good news of Messiah. See, they are turning away from the good news of the Messiah. He says, however, even if we or a messenger out of heaven bring a good news to you beside what we announced to you before, let him be accursed. As we have said before, and now I say again, if anyone brings a good news to you beside what you have received, being Yeshua, let him be accursed. He repeats it twice. Paul is zealous about Yeshua, our Messiah. So he says, for do I now persuade men or Elohim? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I should not be a servant of the Messiah. See, if I were seeking, he's saying, if I were seeking to tickle your ears, if I were seeking to seek after the praise and adoration or the acceptance of men, mankind, I'm not deserving to even be a servant to the Messiah. He says in verse 11, and I make known to you, brothers, that the good news announced by me is not according to man. For I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it. He didn't receive the message of the good news from man. He didn't receive it from any means by which anybody could teach. He says, but through a revelation of Yeshua, Messiah. We know the story where Paul, he's there on the road, and all of a sudden he's blinded by the light, and Yeshua, he appears to him and says, why do you persecute me? Okay, that's what he's referring to right here. So he says, I did not receive it from a man, nor was I taught it, but through a revelation of Yeshua Messiah. For you have heard of my former behavior in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the assembly of Elohim and ravaged it. He persecuted those who were believers in Yeshua. Which, it's funny because he calls those who are believers in Yeshua the assembly of Elohim. Get that? And I progressed in Judaism beyond many my age and in my race, being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers. That is a key phrase, traditions of the fathers. Okay? Keep that in mind. Traditions of the fathers, because he's going to begin, that is going to be the wrapping of the context throughout this book. He says he was exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers, but when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor to reveal his Son to me, that I might bring him the good news to the nations. He's saying, I might bring Yeshua as the good news to the nations, that I did not immediately consult with the flesh and blood. Neither did I go up to Jerusalem, to those who were the emissaries before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha, or Peter, and remained with him for 15 days, and I saw no other of the emissaries except Jacob, the brother of the Master. And what I write to you, see, before Elohim, I did not lie. Then I went into the districts of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still not known by sight to the assemblies of Judah, which were in Messiah. So he's saying he wasn't even known. He's giving a backstory of his conversion, and then a short diagram of history by which where he went, who he learned from, and how long. So at that beginning period, the people in Judah who were believers, who were the elect, they had no clue who he was. But they were hearing that only. They were hearing only that the one who once persecuted us now brings as good news the belief which he once ravaged. So the very thing that he was so ardently against, he's now bringing as the good news. So they were esteeming Elohim in me. They were praising the Most High for seeing the fruit of the Most High in Paul. So chapter 2. Then after 14 years, again I went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along too. And I went up by revelation, and laid before them that good news which I proclaim among the nations, but separately to those who were esteemed, lest somehow I run, or had run, in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, though a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Okay, he's getting into though it is a command, he's getting into the Torah, things of the Torah, that keeping the Torah without belief in Yeshua as the Messiah, he's about to start diving into why the Torah is it brings nothing good if you don't believe in the one who brought it, being Yeshua. Okay, so, but as for the false brothers sneakily brought in, who sneaked in to spy out our freedom which we have in Messiah Yeshua, in order to enslave us, to these we did not yield in subjection, not even for an hour, so that the truth of the good news remains in you. They did not yield in subjection to the things that they were saying, the false brothers. But from those who were esteemed to be what they were, it makes no difference to me. Elohim shows no partiality, for those who were esteemed contributed nothing to me. Okay. But on the contrary, when they saw that the good news to be uncircumcised had been entrusted to me, even as Peter to the circumcised. Okay, and see what he is referring to, the uncircumcised versus circumcised. You see in Torah that the Hebrew people, they circumcised all the males on the 8th day. of their life. Okay, so we see circumcision versus uncircumcision. It's really just a comparison between Jew versus Gentile, those within covenant and those outside of covenant. So when you're seeing this, that's what he's referring to, Jew, Gentile. Peter was sent to feed the sheep, those who were Jews. And that's what Paul is saying. And Paul, he was sent out into the nations, knowing the Torah and teaching of the good news of the salvation of Yeshua. So he's going out into the nations. Gentile literally means a nation out of covenant. So that's what we're seeing here. For he who worked in Kepha, or Peter, to make an emissary to the circumcised, also worked in me for the nations. See, that's what he said in verse 8. I'll read those two again, 7 and 8. But on the contrary, when they saw that the good news to the uncircumcised had been entrusted to me, so the news to the nations being entrusted to Paul, even as Peter to the circumcised, or to those in covenant, those the Jews. For he who worked in Peter, the same person, the same Messiah, the same individual, Yeshua, who worked in Peter to make him an emissary to the circumcised, worked in me for the nations. So in Jacob, Kepha, and Yohanan, who seemed to be supports, came to know the favor that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, in order that we go to the nations and they to the circumcised. So he's saying that they have their own assignments, okay, given to them by the Most High. And Peter, Yaakov, I wonder if that's James, and John were given to the Jews, to spread the good news amongst their brethren. That we go to the nations and they to the circumcised. Verse 10, chapter 2, verse 10. Only that we might remember the poor, which I myself was eager to do. And when Kepha had come to Antioch, I stood with him to his face because he was at fault. So there was an altercation. Paul called out Peter, is what he's saying. He's saying, before some came from Yaakov, he was eating with the nations, but when they came, he began to withdraw and separate himself in fear of those of the circumcision. So Peter was essentially in fear of man because of the opinion of the Jews. Respecter of persons. But when I saw, verse 13, and the rest of the Jews, the Yehudim, joined him in hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led away by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they are not walking straight according to the truth of the good news, I said to Peter, before them all, if you, being a Jew, live as the nations and not as the Jews, why do you compel the nations to live as the Jews? Strong words. We, Yehudim, the Jews, by nature and not of the nations, sinners, knowing that a man is not declared right by the works of Torah, but through the belief in Yeshua Messiah. even we have believed in Messiah Yeshua in order to be declared right by belief in the Messiah and not by works of Torah. Because by works of Torah, no flesh shall be declared right. Okay, so Torah by itself yields nothing. And that's going to be the common theme all the way through. Okay? But through belief in Yeshua the Messiah. Okay. Verse 17, 2:17. And if, while seeking to be declared right by Messiah, we ourselves also are found sinners, is Messiah then the servant of sin? Let it not be. For if I rebuild what I once overthrew, I establish myself a transgressor. For through Torah I died to Torah in order to live to Elohim. I have been impaled with Messiah, and I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. And that which I now live in the flesh, I live by belief in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the favor of Elohim if righteousness is through Torah, then Messiah died for nothing. Okay, and see, in the book of Romans, Paul tells us that the beginning of righteousness cannot be achieved by Torah alone. If it were achieved by Torah alone, then Yeshua died for nothing. There'd be no need for the Messiah. So that's what he's saying here. But we have a Messiah. Okay. 22 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. And we will get on to chapters 3 and 4 in the next video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. We'll dive in. Bless you. Thank you.